Welcome back to the Foundry by Forge College. So if you've been following along with our blockchain fundamentals track, you know we've been gathering a massive, and I mean massive, mountain of research notes. Right now, it probably looks a little bit like a frantic red string conspiracy board that desperately needs organizing. Well, today's the day. We are going to transform that messy mountain into a beautifully structured, defensible capstone blueprint. We're talking about taking all your raw historical data and turning it into a coherent narrative and timeline. By the end of this explainer, you're going to have the exact engineering schematic you need to map out the intellectual lineage of blockchain. Okay, let's dive into this. Our agenda today acts as our engineering schematic for the ultimate capstone assembly line. We'll start with raw materials, move into collect and prune, choose our format, sequence our causal anchors, do some annotations and polish, and finally, hit the quality control checkpoint. Starting off with Section 1, Raw Materials to Blueprint. Basically, gathering the gears for your timeline. Now, in our last lesson, evaluating sources and building evidence, we were in pure collection mode, right? You were mining for information, you were evaluating credibility. But now it's time to stop gathering and start building. We are shifting hats from researchers to architects. And the good news? You actually don't have to start from scratch today, because you already have your raw materials ready to go, a scoped thesis, a prioritized inventory, and an annotated comparison table filled with your source-level evidence chains. The heavy lifting is pretty much done. Your only job now is to literally just bolt these components together so they tell a clear chronological story. And a crucial part of bolting things together is using what we call a provenance note. This is just a brief, maybe 1 to 2 sentence annotation explaining exactly why a specific source is trustworthy, or frankly highlighting its limitations. Because let's be honest, if we just slap facts together with intellectual duct tape, the whole thing is eventually going to fall apart. We're building a rigorous historical argument here, not a house of cards. Using provenance notes allows you to transparently prove the structural integrity of your historical claims to absolutely anyone reading your capstone. That brings us to step 1. Collect and prune, setting up the factory floor. We are officially moving into the manufacturing process now, and what might feel like a massive, overwhelming writing task actually breaks down into a highly predictable 5-step sequence. Now, what's really interesting about this layout is that by mapping it out like this, collect, choose, sequence, integrate, and polish, we completely eliminate the cognitive overload of staring at a blank page. You just take your materials and systematically move them from station 1 all the way through station 5. But as you prune your research at this first station, there's one magic number you've got to remember: 8. This is a core requirement of your capstone blueprint. You must retain a minimum of 8 pre-blockchain innovations that directly link to subsequent developments in Bitcoin. You might have researched 20 fascinating ideas, but you need to prune that list down to the absolute best, most defensible 8 that support your specific thesis. Moving right along to step 2, choose format and layout, selecting the right chassis for your project. The physical shape your capstone takes depends entirely on the temporal span of your argument. If you're covering sweeping eras of history, the intuitive left-to-right flow of a horizontal timeline is absolutely fantastic. But if you're looking at a highly condensed period with a lot of overlapping inventions, a vertical timeline stacks those dense clusters beautifully. We actually talk about this a lot in the learning community here at Forge College. Then, of course, you have your thematic narrative outline, which is brilliant for deep, argument-driven essays or a hybrid timeline that balances both. Basically, there's no single right answer. The right chassis is simply the one that makes your specific thesis the easiest to digest. So the crucial point is this: whether you choose a highly visual timeline file with event spacing and callouts, or a structured narrative outline document with paragraph prompts and anchor quotes, the argumentative chronological flow must be crystal clear. The format is just the vehicle. The chronological argument, that's the engine driving it forward. All right, on to step 3, sequence with causal anchors. This is where we start really bolting the timeline together. Just having a list of events in chronological order isn't enough, right? We have to connect them using explicit active language. Enter the causal anchor. This is a specific event with a 25 to 75 word caption, asserting its direct connection to later developments. You're going to use phrases like contributed to or influenced design choices in. Think of these as the load-bearing pillars of your entire narrative arc. Without them, your timeline just sort of collapses into a random pile of dates. They tell the reader exactly why event A led to event B. But, as we all know, history isn't always neat and tidy.
Sometimes a connection between two innovations is plausible, but maybe not directly proven. And this brilliantly illustrates where we use an uncertainty tag. By using explicit markers like inference or contested, you preserve your intellectual honesty. In fact, for this capstone, marking at least two claims as contested or inferred actually makes your argument stronger. It significantly reduces reviewer pushback because it shows you understand the true nuances of the historical record. When we map temporal causality, we can watch the flow directly. We start with the cypherpunk roots in the 1980s, move into proof-of-work concepts in the 1990s, and finally land on the Bitcoin white paper in 2008. By using causal anchors and uncertainty tags across a journey like this, you clearly link those early technological precedents directly to the eventual emergence of the blockchain. You're drawing a continuous, highly defensible line right through history.
Which brings us to steps 4 and 5, annotations, polish, and export, the final coat of paint. This is where we apply that final polish to our engineered blueprint. We insert our inline citations, add hover callouts if we're using visual software, or maybe drop in footnotes for text documents. Then we prep the file for export. And when you do export, there is one absolutely critical component you must attach, a 150 to 300 word metadata block. Think of this block as the user manual for the instructor reviewing your draft. It explicitly states the scope of your project, the intended audience, your chosen citation format, and any unresolved questions or editorial choices you made along the way. It perfectly frames your entire project for the reviewer before they even read your very first claim. And finally, step 6, the quality control checkpoint, testing the structural integrity. Let's move to and see how this builds into your final non-negotiable quality gate. Before you hit export and submit that file for peer and instructor review, ask yourself a few rapid-fire questions. Do you have a minimum of 8 innovations present? Are there explicit dates or clear ranges for every single event? Are your citations properly tied back to your annotated table? Do you have your causality tags in place, with at least 2 explicitly marked as contested? And finally, are your thesis and metadata block included? Checking off these boxes ensures you hit absolutely every dimension of the rubric. Because remember, history is shaped not just by the facts we gather, but by how honestly and carefully we connect them. That right there is the core takeaway of this entire process. A synthetic balance of breadth and depth, combined with transparent uncertainty tags, takes what could be just a vague, impressionistic story and turns it into a rigorous, defensible historical argument. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. How will your assembled blueprint shape our understanding of Web3 history? You now have the tools and the exact engineering schematic to draft a phenomenal narrative. I highly encourage you to head over to forge.college to explore even more incredible Web3 resources and finalize your capstone. Thank you so much for joining me today on this explainer, and happy drafting.